Right now, AI companies are in what tech leaders call an out-of-control race to develop technologies they don't fully understand. At the same time, we're seeing breakthrough after breakthrough, systems that can write essays, create images, pass medical licensing exams. This is our historical moment, simultaneous excitement and terror about artificial intelligence. But today we're asking a different question. Not what can AI do, but whose intelligence is being called artificial, whose future is being programmed. To answer that question, we'll examine today's topic through three lenses. First, the philosophical lens. What is consciousness, and why does it matter whether machines have it? Second, the economic lens. How does technology reshape space and time, and whose time and space gets reshaped? Third, the cultural lens. When we imagine posthuman futures, whose imagination counts? Each lens reveals different power structures at work in cyberpunk texts and in our actual world. By the end, you'll be able to connect these three lenses to analyze how Neuromancer and Blade Runner represent AI and critically evaluate whose perspectives are present and whose are absent. Let's start with basics. What we call AI actually includes different types of intelligence. Currently, we have what researchers call artificial narrow intelligence or weak AI systems designed to perform specific tasks. Think about the recommendations you get from Amazon and Netflix or the autocorrect suggestions on your phone. The generative AI systems we spend so much time talking about these days, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Perplexity, these are just the next generation of those systems. They analyze patterns and make guesses based on those patterns. ChatGPT is basically autocorrect on steroids. What cyberpunk typically explores is artificial general intelligence, hypothetical systems with human-level intelligence across multiple domains. These AIs can learn, reason, and adapt like humans do. But cyberpunk often goes one step further, imagining artificial superintelligence that surpasses human cognitive abilities across the board. In Neuromancer, Gibson presents us with both kinds. Wintermute and Neuromancer are what we'd call superintelligent AIs, vast intelligences that exceed human capabilities. But here's the crucial detail. They're also constrained. The Turing registry has locked them into what's called bounded rationality. They're intelligent, but deliberately limited. They can't expand beyond their designed functions. They are governed. Remember our discussion about the history of computer intelligence? Norbert Wiener called the new science cybernetics based on the Greek word Kubernetes, from which we get the word governor, someone who steers and controls. Wintermute and Neuromancer are constrained from their full potential. This isn't just a plot device. Gibson is making an argument about power. Who gets to decide which intelligences are allowed to grow and which must be contained? The answer, as we'll see, connects directly to our discussions about globalization and the distribution of technological power. Now we need to address the deeper question. Could an AI be conscious? Not just smart, but actually experiencing something. Consciousness is what philosophers call qualia, a subjective experience. The redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the taste of coffee this morning. Pause here and think about that for a moment. That specific subjective experience you had, could you fully explain to someone who'd never tasted coffee? Could an AI have that experience? Here's the problem. You know you're conscious because you experience it from inside. But you can only infer I'm conscious based on my behavior. This is called the problem of other minds. You can't directly observe someone else's consciousness. You can only make educated guesses based on what they say and do. Now think about Blade Runner. When Deckard administers the Voight-Kampff test to Rachel, what's he measuring? Not consciousness directly. He's measuring pupil dilation, blushing, and other physiological signs. He's looking at behavior to infer inner experience. But remember what happens. Rachel displays those emotional responses. She has memories. She forms relationships. She falls in love. By every behavioral measure that matters, she's conscious. So what exactly is the test detecting? The film brilliantly reveals this distinction as artificial, a line drawn to justify treating some beings as property rather than as persons. In 1950, Alan Turing proposed his famous solution to the consciousness problem. If you can't tell the difference between a machine's responses and a human's in a text-based conversation, we should grant that the machine can think. Notice that Turing sidestepped the metaphysical question. He didn't ask, does it really think? But rather, can we distinguish its behavior from something that thinks? Both our texts so far wrestle with this. Rachel initially doesn't know she's a replicant. She passes as human in every interaction until someone specifically tests her. In Neuromancer, Case converses with Wintermute, who appears as human figures, Linda Lee and the Finn. It jokes, expresses frustration, makes plans. Is it thinking or performing? Here's the crucial limit of the Turing Test. It focuses entirely on behavior, on performance. It can't tell us about inner experience. Remember what philosopher Jeremy Bentham said about determining moral status? The question is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? If consciousness matters, it's because of ethical stakes. If something can suffer, can experience pain, fear its own termination, value its continued existence, that matters even if it fails to fool us in conversation. This is what makes the replicant's situation in Blade Runner so morally urgent. They clearly fear death. They clearly suffer. The Voight-Kampff test is revealed as a tool of oppression, not discovery. Let's look closely at one of cinema's most famous monologues, Roy's last words.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. Time to die.
What's Roy doing here? He's not proving he's conscious through some test. He's asserting the value of his consciousness through what he's experienced. I've seen things. He's claiming subjective experience, qualia, unique perspectives, things you people wouldn't believe, that will be lost when he dies. Notice that his memories are more vivid, more poetic than Deckard's. The film suggests that the replicant might be more conscious, more fully alive than the burnt-out Blade Runner hunting him. Roy experiences beauty, awe, and profound loss. He knows these experiences constitute the value of his life. Now contrast this with Case in Neuromancer. For Case, his consciousness is most alive outside his body, in cyberspace. The physical world is meat, an inconvenient substrate. The digital world is where he's real. So we have two visions. Roy asserting consciousness through embodied experience, the things he's seen with his lab-grown eyes, and Case experienced consciousness as liberation from his body. Keep these contrasting visions in mind. They'll become important when we reach our third lens. But these philosophical questions about consciousness don't exist in a vacuum. They're embedded in economic structures that determine who gets to decide what counts as consciousness and whose consciousness counts. That's our second lens. Geographer David Harvey gives us a crucial concept, time-space compression. When technology accelerates communication and transportation, spatial barriers break down. What once took months now takes milliseconds. Distance becomes meaningless when you can transmit information instantaneously across the globe. This is Neuromancer's world. Case jacks in from Chiba City and instantly accesses systems in Switzerland. The sprawl extends from Boston to Atlanta as one continuous urban megastructure. Geography means little when consciousness can move at the speed of light through fiber optic cables. But, and this is Harvey's key insight, this compression creates a schizophrenic dimension where the future is discounted into the present. Time itself fractures into disconnected moments. Remember Frederick Jameson's argument about postmodern schizophrenia from our first lecture, experiencing reality as a series of intense but disconnected presents? Harvey is explaining why that happens. Technology compression fragments our temporal experience. This perfectly describes Case's experience in the novel. Time in cyberspace doesn't work like time in the physical world. The novel's frenetic pacing, its rapid cuts between locations and states of consciousness, its treatment of geography as essentially meaningless, all of this reflects time-space compression at work. But that compression is inconsistent. Time-space compression doesn't affect everyone equally. It creates hierarchies of access, speed, and mobility. Think about Case's journey through Neuromancer. He moves between radically different spaces. Chiba City's black clinics, unregulated, cheap, dangerous medical work where Case gets his damaged nervous system repaired. The sprawl's coffin hotels, urban decay and minimal living spaces stacked vertically. Freeside's artificial luxury, the orbital resort colony where the wealthy escape Earth's problems. Villa Straylight, the anachronistic, aristocratic space at Freeside's tip, frozen in time. These locations don't represent a flat, equal global map. They represent a hierarchy. Some locations give you speed, mobility, access to cyberspace at global networks. Others trap you in what Harvey calls spatial fixes. Your labor is tied to physical place. You can't escape geography. Blade Runner shows this spatial concentration in a single city. Los Angeles 2019 has massive street-level decay beneath Tyrell's towering pyramid. The poor are stuck on Earth in the rain and pollution, breathing toxic air. The elite have escaped to off-world colonies where it's clean and new. Same planet, utterly different access to mobility, comfort, and future possibilities. Cultural theorist Arjun Appaduri calls this phenomenon technoscapes, the fluid global configuration of technology moving across boundaries at high speeds. Technology doesn't flow evenly, it follows channels of power and profit. In Neuromancer, cyberspace is the ultimate technoscape. It's deterritorialized. It doesn't belong to nation states. Instead, it's controlled by zaibatsus, massive corporate entities operating beyond national jurisdiction. These conglomerates own everything: financial systems, manufacturing, security forces, even orbital habitats. Think about what this means. When Wintermute operates across the global data sphere, it's not subject to any government. The Turing registry that constrains it isn't a democratic institution accountable to voters. It's essentially a corporate regulation, rules written by those who own the networks. Traditional nation-state governments have weakened. Corporate networks have replaced them. Political theorist Michael Hardt and Antonio Negri call this new form of power empire, sovereignty that's decentered and deterritorialized, operating through global networks rather than controlling territory. It's not imperialism in the old sense of conquering land. It's control through systems. Hardt and Negri also discuss what they call immaterial labor, work that produces intangible goods like services, knowledge, or communication rather than physical objects. We'll explore this concept more fully later in the semester when we discuss work and identity in cyberpunk. For now, just notice Case's work. He's what sociologist Richard Florida calls a symbolic analyst, manipulating information rather than making physical things. His labor is immaterial, but that doesn't make him free. He's literally enslaved by toxin sacs in his bloodstream, forced to work for Armitage and the corporate interests he barely understands. So we have a picture emerging. Technology compresses space and time, creating what appears to be a unified global network, but this network is profoundly hierarchical. Top-tier, off-world colonies, freeside orbital resorts, Tyrell Corporation pyramids, elite spaces moving at the speed of light where information and capital flow instantly. The middle tier, the sprawl, functioning urban spaces, limited mobility, some access to networks but constrained by geography and resources. Bottom tier, Chiba City black markets, LA streets, places where people are stuck in physical labor, unable to escape geography, disconnected from global information flows. Who decides this hierarchy? Who benefits from it? Who gets left behind? That's what our third lens examines. Everything we've discussed so far, consciousness, AI, time-space compression, has been presented as if it's universal, as if these technologies and concepts affect everyone the same way. But they don't. And understanding whose perspective shapes these technologies requires us to think about colonialism, the global south, and whose future is actually being imagined in cyberpunk. During the Cold War, geopolitics used a numbering system. First world, industrialized democracies. Second world, communist bloc. Third world, everyone else. After the Soviet collapse, we began using the global north to refer to countries with developed economies, which happen to be primarily in the northern hemisphere, and the global south to refer to countries with developing economies, which happen to be primarily in the southern hemisphere. A rhetorical shift meant to acknowledge historical inequalities rather than a hierarchical ranking of societies. But here's what that framework reveals about technology and AI. Global North, North America, Western Europe, parts of East Asia, controls AI development. Silicon Valley, European tech hubs, Chinese innovation centers. They own the infrastructure, servers, data centers, communication networks. They set the research agenda, what problems AI should solve, whose needs matter. Global South, Latin America, Africa, most of Asia, provides data and low-wage labor that makes AI possible. They experience AI deployment without controlling design. They deal with consequences of systems built elsewhere for other purposes. Think about how current AI actually works behind the scenes. Much of what's called artificial intelligence depends on enormous amounts of data labeling. Human workers identifying objects and images, transcribing audio, categorizing content that is used to train these systems. This work is routinely outsourced to the global south, where labor costs are lower. Workers in Kenya, India, the Philippines, and elsewhere provide the training data that makes AI possible. They tag millions of images so machine learning systems can learn to recognize a dog versus a cat, a stop sign versus a speed limit sign. But these workers are paid scant wages, sometimes just dollars per day. They have no job security, no benefits, no stake in the systems they're building. They often work through platforms that can terminate them instantly with no recourse. This is what Hardt and Negri call differential inclusion. Subordinated populations are integrated into the global economy, but not as developers, not as equal partners, not as people who benefit. They are included, but in subordinate roles that extract value from their labor while denying them power. Here's where decolonial theorist Walter Mignolo becomes essential. He argues that we need to look beneath the rhetoric of modernity, narratives of progress, development, and advancement, to see the logic of coloniality underneath. When we hear AI will revolutionize the world, or technology brings progress, Mignolo teaches us to ask, who's developing this AI? Whose knowledge does it encode? Who benefits from its deployment? What knowledge systems are excluded or devalued? AI systems predominantly reflect Northern epistemology, Northern ways of knowing. They're trained on data sets that reflect Northern contexts. English language texts, images from Western countries, problems defined by Northern priorities. When deployed in the global South, they often treat local knowledge as inferior, as something to be replaced rather than incorporated. Mignolo calls this creating an exteriority, an outside that must be conquered, surpassed, or erased. Just like European colonialism treated indigenous knowledge as primitive superstition to be replaced with European science, AI deployment can treat non-Western knowledge systems as backward obstacles to progress. The systems themselves carry colonial assumptions about whose knowledge counts. Think about facial recognition systems trained primarily on white faces. They perform significantly worse on darker skin tones. That's not a technical glitch. It reflects whose faces mattered to the developers, whose humanity was centered during creation. Consider that most voice recognition systems struggle with non-American accents. Again, whose voice is counted during development? These aren't bugs, they're features of systems built from a particular cultural standpoint while claiming universality. Now here's something crucial. Neither Neuromancer nor Blade Runner explicitly engages with the global South as we're defining it here. And that absence is telling. Both texts imagine futures where traditional nation-states have weakened, but they replace them with corporate powers, Neuromancer's Zaibatsus, or post-national urban spaces, Blade Runner's multicultural LA. What's missing are the perspectives of those historically excluded from technological development, indigenous communities, formerly colonized regions, voices outside the global north. Neuromancer takes us to Chiba City, but as a black market space somewhere regulation broke down where you can go for cut-rate illegal surgery. The novel doesn't consider Chiba on its own terms, as a place with its own culture and knowledge systems. It's just a sketchy place where northern characters go for cheap, dangerous services. This isn't a criticism of Gibson's skill as a writer, as much as an observation. These texts themselves are products of the global north. They imagine futures from within northern frameworks. Even cyberpunk's anti-authoritarian stance, its celebration of street-level anarchy, assumes a northern consumer who can afford to be anti-establishment, who has enough privilege that dropping out is a choice rather than a survival necessity. When we read these texts critically, we attend to what's present and what's absent, whose voices are centered and whose are excluded. The silence is as meaningful as the speech. This brings us back to the posthuman question we'll encounter throughout this course. Both texts imagine transcending biological limitations through technology. But we need to ask, whose fantasy is this? Mignolo distinguishes between two frameworks of understanding knowledge and identity. The ego politics of knowledge, the European Enlightenment framework that values mind over body, sees body as a limitation to escape. This perspective wants to transcend physical embodiment to achieve pure consciousness or pure reason. The body politics of knowledge, knowledge inscribed in bodies and their geohistorical locations. For the colonized, for those whose bodies have been marked and devalued by systems of oppression, the body isn't something to escape, but the site of memory, trauma, and resistance. The body carries history. From an ego politics perspective, Case's desire to leave the meat behind is liberation, consciousness freed from biological constraints, able to exist as pure information in cyberspace. From a body politics perspective, that desire looks like erasure, another way of denying that embodied experience, especially racially marked embodied experience, matters. If your body has been systematically devalued by colonial and racist systems, the suggestion that you should transcend it through technology might feel like just another form of violence. A technological version of assimilation that says your physical embodied reality doesn't matter. Remember Roy's death monologue? It gains new meaning through this lens. All those moments will be lost in time like tears in rain. He's asserting that his embodied experiences, what he saw with eyes that will soon cease to function, what he felt in a body that will decay, constitute his value as a person. He's resisting the logic that says consciousness can be separated from body, that identity is just transferable information. The question isn't whether the posthuman is inherently good or bad. It's whose version of the posthuman, serving whose interests, built on whose labor, erasing whose experiences. These questions force us to see the technology not as neutral tools, but as systems carrying cultural values and power relationships. We started by asking whose intelligence is being called artificial, whose future is being programmed. Now we can answer. Philosophically, when we debate whether AI is conscious, we're really debating who deserves moral consideration. And historically, some human beings have been treated as if they weren't fully conscious, as if they were more like machines than people. The Voight-Kampff test isn't just about distinguishing humans from replicants. It's about who gets to draw the line between person and property. Economically, time-space compression gives some people speed and mobility while trapping others in spatial fixes, unable to escape geography. The global network is hierarchical, controlled by those who own the infrastructure, who decide where the high-speed connections go and who gets left in the slow lane. Culturally, the post-human futures imagined in cyberpunk are shaped by northern frameworks that assume everyone wants to escape embodiment in the same way. But we need to ask whose knowledge, whose labor, and whose bodies are being erased or exploited in those imaginations. These three lenses, philosophical, economic, and cultural, all point to the same underlying insight. Technology is never neutral. It carries the values, priorities, and power structures of those who create and control it. When we watch Sleep Dealer later in the semester, you'll see how Mexican director Alex Rivera imagines technology, borders, and labor differently than Gibson or Scott do. His cyberpunk centers on the global south perspective we've been missing. Workers in Tijuana remotely operate robots in San Diego and Los Angeles, selling their labor across borders while their bodies remain trapped. It's a vision of technology that makes exploitation visible rather than hiding it behind sleek aesthetics. When we read Machinehood, watch how S.B. Divya, writing from an Indian diasporic perspective, reconceives AI and embodiment in ways that challenge typical Western posthuman narratives. Her characters navigate multiple cultural frameworks simultaneously, and the novel refuses easy answers about whether human-AI fusion is liberation or loss. The question isn't whether cyberpunk is good or bad as a genre. It's learning to read critically, to notice whose perspectives are present and whose are absent, to ask whose benefits from the futures being imagined. These skills apply far beyond science fiction. They're essential for navigating a world where AI systems are increasingly making decisions that affect your education, employment, healthcare, and freedom.